Welcome to the online learning platform at Department of Civil Engineering, BMS Institute of Technology and Management, Bangalore. I'm Dr. Rajesh Gopinath and you're along with me for the course Water Supply and Treatment Engineering. As you can see in slide 5, in the previous session we had discussed about removal of temporary and permanent hardness through the process of softening. In today's session, that is slide 6, we shall be discussing about the concept of fluoridation and defluoridation. I shall first introduce you to the aspect of fluorides, its natural presence. Further, I shall explain to you its historical evolution. Moving on, I shall explain to you the drinking water standards of fluoride in drinking water, considering that it's a double-edged sword problem for public health engineers. Further, I'll explain to you the supplementation aspects of fluoride, and then moving on, we shall discuss further about the detailed aspect of fluoridation, its importance, and the damages caused due to excess of fluoridation. Then we shall move towards the concept of defluoridation. Finally, I shall be summarizing the presentation and listing the references for your kind perusal. Let us start with the introduction with respect to the existence of fluoride in natural water bodies. Slide 7. So, what basically happens is the presence of fluoride is varied among the different types of water bodies. That is, usually in the sea water, the concentration is up to 0.8 to 1.4 ppm. But when it comes to your fresh surface water, such as rivers and lakes, it is mostly very low and the concentration is lesser than half ppm. Basically, it is your groundwater which has a very high variable concentration and it can go up to 300 ppm also. Now, the reason why groundwater is more vulnerable to fluoride enrichment is because of the weathering action which happens at great depths and due to the greater impact of water rock reactions in the aquifers, that is your permeable rocks. As you can see in the map, the groundwater with high fluoride concentration occurs in most part of this world. In fact, there are more than 200 million people around the world who drink water from sources which have concentration greater than the danger level of 1.5 ppm. Now, on this earth, there are 4 fluoride belts which have been identified: Japan, Pacific coast of the Americas, East African Rift Valley which stretches from Eritrea to Malawi, and finally the last fluoride belt, that is Turkey through Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, India, northern Thailand and China. So we belong to this belt. Please do not be surprised when I tell you that a lake in Kenya called as Lake Nakuru has the highest measured concentration of fluoride and it is as high as 2800 ppm. Let us now move on to slide 8 to understand the historical evolution. Artificial water fluoridation is considered as one of the 10 greatest public health achievements of 20th century. But how did we arrive at that? This happened due to the discovery of a Colorado Spring dentist named Frederick S. McVeigh. He was the first person to make a connection of water and fluoridation in United States. And this basically happened because he was observing that some of his patients had exhibited a varied degree of staining, that is mottled tooth, or in simple words, tooth hypomineralization. In 1901, he started giving systematic attention to this issue of mottling and brown stains. And he was able to hypothesize that for his patients in Colorado Springs, this problem of mottling, this problem of staining, that is brown stains, had something to do with the water supply, something to do with the water that they were drinking. A decade later or closer to that, by 1909, Mackay, with the help of Dr. G.V. Black, finally made the discovery that it is fluoride which is connected with the prevention of dental caries. That is, if fluoride can be present in the drinking water, then dental caries will not happen. That is based on the observations. Based on the observations carried out by Mackay and Dr. G.V. Black, they were able to conclude, due to the fact that the patients who had sufficient fluoride in the drinking water never had issues of brown stains, and hence they made the conclusion that if fluoride is present in the drinking water, then the issue of tooth hypomineralization would not happen. The earliest study on artificial water fluoridation was carried out in the 1940s in US. There were 3 towns as a part of the study: Grand Rapids, Muskegon, Aurora. Grand Rapids was the experimental town wherein 1 ppm fluoride was added to its drinking water. Muskegon was a control town wherein there was no fluoride in its drinking water. Aurora, this town, neither fluoride was added nor removed. Rather, its water was naturally fluoridated and had fluoride up to 1.4 ppm. The observation which was made from this 3-armed trial was dental caries in the 6-year-old kids in Grand Rapids, that is the experimental town, was 50% of that of the control town, that is Muskegon, which means there were more than 50% cases in a town wherein the water did not have fluoride with respect to dental caries. Similarly, dental caries in the experimental town of Grand Rapids was similar to that of Aurora, which was a naturally fluoridated town. So, in simple words, the observation is, if your water has fluoride up to 1 ppm or let us say 1.4 ppm, then the chances of dental caries is less. If your drinking water has no fluoride, then the chances of dental caries is very high. Basically, between 1933 to 1945, that is the epidemiology phase, Dr. Dean had carried out study for 21 cities wherein he correlated the different levels of fluoride in drinking water to 2 issues. One was dental caries and the other was dental fluorosis, because he had made 2 important observations in 1931. That is, first, there was reduced caries in children who had access to fluoridated water in comparison to non-fluoridated water. But he also made one more important observation, that is, increased fluoride concentration in the water was leading to higher prevalence of enamel mottling, that is fluorosis. As I told you, fluoride is a double-edged sword problem. Less of fluoride is also bad and more of fluoride is also dangerous. Incidentally, in the year 1930, a chemist called as Churchill had identified fluoride in the drinking water to be as high as 14 ppm. It was finally concluded that the maximal reduction in caries happens at 1 ppm, and when the concentration of fluoride rises above 1 ppm, the risk of enamel mottling increases significantly. Due to this observation, there was a drastic turnaround, and cities who had started fluoridation had begun to stop it. For instance, Kilmarnock, who had begun fluoridation in 1956, totally stopped it by 1962, and certain towns in Scotland, such as the town of Wick, began operations to remove the excess of fluoride which was added to the drinking water. Now let us move on to slide 9 to have a better understanding of how fluoride helps to overcome the problem of dental caries. In this slide 9, there are 3 set of images. image on your top left hand side basically are the 4 stages of caries development. The image on the top right hand corner is a simple comparison of a healthy tooth, dental caries and cavity. And the image on the bottom right hand corner is a actual representation of a comparison of a healthy tooth and a tooth which has been affected by caries or cavity. Now, before I explain to you how fluoride prevents dental caries, first we need to understand the basic difference between the terms such as dental caries, tooth decay and cavity. Are actually dental caries and cavities the same thing? We need to understand this better. Now, please remember, tooth decay is actually a common term for dental caries. While tooth decay is a term used commonly by layman or people like us, dental caries is a technical or a medical or a dental term which is used by the doctors. Okay, so basically tooth decay and dental caries are the same. As you can see in the top right hand image, it is basically dental caries or tooth decay which ultimately develops into cavities. To have a better understanding of how dental caries happens or tooth decay happens or how they develop into cavities, we need to understand what actually happens when we eat food. When we eat food, we chew the food and then the food that is chewed gets mixed with the saliva which is generated in our mouth. Now, in this process, there are bacteria which are present who, in the presence of enzymes, will break down this food into several byproducts. If in case the food what we eat has more of sucrose or sugar content, then the byproducts will be acidic in nature, that is pH less than 7. So automatically, naturally, any human being who is consuming more of sweet food, the bacteria will tend to produce more acidic byproducts. So automatically one stage will come wherein the pH level of the mouth will tend to decline or fall down as more and more acids are being produced. Here we need to understand one thing. Our normal teeth is a chemical compound called as hydroxyapatite. Okay, and it's a very strong compound and can withstand a pH more than 5.6, which means even though acids are being produced in your mouth, as long as the pH is not below 5.6, your teeth is safe. But for a person who indulges in more of sweet food, if the acidic byproduct pulls down the pH below 5.6, then the tooth gets damaged. Okay, and that is when dental caries happen. What happens here is these acidic byproducts will break down the tooth enamel, which is by or far the strongest part of your tooth. All right, now with your strongest part of the tooth gone or damaged, that is with the penetration of the tooth enamel by the acid, the softer layer is exposed, which is the dentin. Dentin is vulnerable to acid attack. It is vulnerable to bacterial infection. Now, since dentin is softer and less mineralized than enamel, bacterial acid will have no trouble breaking it down, and eventually it becomes an accelerated process leading to cavitation. That is a cave-like structure, as you can see in the bottom right hand image. So, my dear students, tooth decay or dental caries happened when your tooth enamel was penetrated or damaged. This led to cavities, that is deep caries, wherein a cave-like cavity is formed due to the damage to the dentin. So, now we have understood how tooth mottling or brown staining or tooth decay or deep caries, that is cavity, happens. But if you have listened to me very carefully, throughout this explanation I had never mentioned about fluoride, but it was always said that lack of fluoride caused dental caries. I would like to make it very clear here. It is not as simple as lack of fluoride causes dental caries, but rather if there was sufficient fluoride in your drinking water, then dental caries would not have happened. That is, had fluoride been there in your drinking water, then this bacterial acid would not have been able to damage the enamel or the dentin. So how does this work? Basically, more than 90% of the ingested fluoride is absorbed from the gut, and approximately 50% of this absorbed fluoride is deposited on our bones and teeth, and the remaining is removed via urine. What happens is, as I told you before, our teeth is a very strong structure or compound called as hydroxyapatite, which has hydroxide groups, and this structure is very strong as long as the pH is above 5.6. Naturally, the pH of our mouth is about 7, hence the tooth is safe from decay or caries or cavities. However, as we eat more of sweet or sugary food, there are more acids being produced, and these acids eventually damage the enamel. Basically what is happening is, these acids, they dissolve or corrode or destroy the hydroxyl groups, and when these hydroxyl groups are destroyed, hydroxyapatite becomes a very weak compound, and ultimately the next stage, that is damage of the dentin, happens. In this circumstance, had there been fluoride in your bones and tooth, had there been fluoride in your body, what fluoride would have naturally done is, they would have gone and occupied the empty active sites which has been left vacant due to destruction of hydroxyl groups. Now, with the fluoride replacing the hydroxyl groups, hydroxyapatite becomes a new compound called as hydroxyfluoropatite. Fluoropatite is a stronger compound, stronger structure, and can withstand a pH of up to 4.6, and hence your teeth is safe. And over a period of time, with the ingestion of food, hydroxyl groups are regenerated and they come back to the active sites. So this is how fluoride protects the teeth from leading to cavities. This is how fluorides prevent dental caries from taking place. But as we have learned till now, it's a two-edged sword. That is, less of fluoride is causing dental caries and high of fluoride is causing fluorosis. So what is the chemistry with respect to fluorosis? As I told you, when the hydroxyl groups are destroyed, fluoride naturally comes and occupies these spots and becomes fluoropatite, which is stronger compound. But your natural teeth is not fluoropatite, it is hydroxyapatite. Under normal circumstances, this fluoride is replaced by hydroxyl group. However, in the circumstance of fluorosis, when there is excess of fluoride present, then there is no option or chance for the hydroxyl groups to come back to their active spot, and it is fluoride which will remain there permanently. Yes, with respect to pH, fluoropatite may be a stronger compound, but it has its certain disadvantages also. let us now move on to slide 10 to understand the drinking water standards. Now, in 1984, the World Health Organization had issued a guideline on water fluoridation, and it was temperature specific. While in warm climates, you are supposed to maintain between half to 1 ppm. In cold climate, it was 0.7 to 1.2 ppm. And by default, irrespective of the temperature regime, the permissible upper limit value was 1.5 ppm. Now, the ideology or reasoning behind two different levels with respect to temperature is because people in countries with warm climate tend to consume more water. Hence, there are chances of more ingestion of fluoride. Okay, that is higher increased ingestion of fluoride in comparison to people who are in the colder countries. In 1986, 2 years later, Environmental Protection Agency, United States of America, had established a maximum allowable concentration for fluoride in drinking water of 4 ppm. This was a guideline which was designed to prevent the public from being exposed to harmful levels of fluoride. Unfortunately, 4 ppm is itself a very high level, because at 4 ppm there are chances of fluorosis with respect to dental fluorosis and skeletal fluorosis happening. Now, let us move on to the next slide, slide 11. Here in this slide, we shall try to understand how fluoride enters the human system in the day-to-day activities. This information is important for us because subsequently we are going to talk about fluoridation, that is, how fluoride is added to the water supply scheme, how fluoride is added to the drinking water to handle the issue of dental caries, and how fluoride, if in excess in drinking water, is removed to resolve the issue of fluorosis. Fluoride supplementation can happen in two ways. One is systemic and the other is topical. Systemic is wherein the fluoride is ingested in a small amount during the tooth formation in the jaw and then gets built into the enamel. Topical effects, on the other hand, is when the fluoride is concentrated in the saliva that bathes the teeth and further remineralizes the tooth enamel to build a stronger cavity-resistant outer surface. Now, systemic supplementation can happen in the following manner as represented in the slide. School water fluoridation, that is basically the concept we will discuss further, fluoride drops, fluoride tablets, fluoride lozenges, then milk fluoridation, wherein about 5 ppm of fluoride is added to every 1 liter of milk, and dietary fluorides, that is salt fluoride or fluoride in sugar. Now, salt fluoride can be in the form of sodium fluoride or calcium fluoride. We are herewith talking about fluoride supplements. Now, when you speak about topical supplementation, it is basically either professional application or self-application. This is in the form of sodium fluoride, stannous fluoride, acidulated phosphate fluoride, or even fluoride varnish, that is mouth rinse applications. Having a brief idea of how fluoride enters the body system, now let's try to understand the various merits of fluoridation. This can be direct benefits and indirect benefits. Let's look at slide 12. So by now, I'm sure everyone is aware that fluoride in drinking water prevents tooth decay, prevents dental caries, hence protects individuals of all ages from having cavities, that is deep caries. It has been evident from surveys that more than 164 million work hours are lost each year due to dental related illnesses. Hence, with proper fluoride intake, these work hours can be saved, and eventually you're talking about productivity and saving money. Also, fluoride in your drinking water does not cause any other health issues such as cancer or heart diseases and so forth. Since that there is no tooth decay or dental caries, it obviously means a very good appearance of the teeth, that is white, clear, shining and without blemishes. Fluoride also helps in reduction of dental caries in the primary and permanent teeth, at least by 50% in the primary teeth and 60% in the permanent teeth. Dental caries also helps in root caries reduction by 50%. That is, lifelong consumption of fluoridated water reduces the incidence of root caries. Now, moving on. Orthodontic problems are less among children of the age group 6 to 14 years who live in an area wherein the water has fluorides when compared to those living in area who do not have fluoride in the drinking water. That is malocclusion. Now, further, having fluoride in the drinking water also helps in the reduction of interproximal and coronal caries. That is, there is, as per reports, about 95% less prevalence of interproximal dental caries and reduction of 60% coronal caries in fluoridated communities compared to those of non-fluoridated. Having said all this, obviously having fluoride in the drinking water helps the economy itself, as it reduces the cost of public health expenditure. As you can see in the chart which has been posted, as the fluoride content of water increases beyond 1 ppm, that is 1 mg per liter, the rate or the intensity or the cases of dental caries, cavities declines. But yes, also as the fluoride content of the water increases beyond 1 ppm, the index of fluorosis escalates. Having understood the advantages or merit of fluoridation, now let us move on to slide 13 to understand about the water fluoridation system. As it is evident, fluoride is basically added into the public water supply schemes in the form of chemicals such as sodium fluoride, sodium silicofluoride, hydrofluorosilicic acid, fluorspar, silicofluoride, ammonium silicofluoride. Now, let me give you some information with respect to these chemicals. For instance, sodium fluoride is white, odorless and free-flowing material which is available either as a powder or in the form of crystal. But sodium fluoride is the most expensive source of fluorides. Silicofluoride, this is actually obtained as a byproduct from the purification of phosphate rocks. Now, fluorspar mineral. Now, this basically behaves as a source of fluoride because it contains various amounts of calcium fluoride. Hydrofluorosilicic acid is also used, but it also is expensive. Ammonium silicofluoride, now this is produced by neutralizing fluorosilicic acid with either aqueous ammonia or ammonia in gaseous form. Having said all this, let me tell you the most used chemical for fluoridation. Sodium silicofluoride. This is the most popular, economical, cheapest form of fluoride. With this brief knowledge about how fluoride is added to the water supply system, now let us look at the equipments which are employed for the same purpose. That is, the three types of system in fluoridation, water fluoridation. And they are basically saturator system, solution feeder system, and as you can see in the image, dry feeder system. The saturator system, the principle employed here is 4% of sodium fluoride is produced and injected at desired concentration at the water distribution source with the aid of a pump. When it comes to the dry feeder system, the principle is sodium fluoride or silicofluoride in the form of powder is introduced into a dissolving basin with the aid of an automatic mechanism. The third one, solution feeder system. Here the principle is the volumetric pump which permits addition of a given quantity of hydrofluorosilicic acid in proportion to the amount of water that has to be treated. Let us now move on to slide 14 to understand the various criteria for fluoridation. Already from the previous slide you have understood that the cost and toxicity plays an important role while selecting the type of chemical you need to add for fluoridation. Now in this slide 14 it is understood that water fluoridation is feasible only if there is a municipal water supply which reaches a reasonable number of houses. Okay, people would rather drink water from a protected water supply scheme than from their individual wells or rainwater tanks. Also, suitable equipment must be present. The source of water and the supply of water must be assured throughout the year. Please remember, there should be sufficient money available for the system, for the installation and the running cost, which means maintenance is also a very important criteria that needs to be considered when it comes to fluoridation. Bottom line is whether fluoridation has to be provided or not and how it has to be provided. It all depends on the average cost of water fluoridation per capita per demand. Now let us move on to slide 15. In this slide, we shall try to understand the potential, probable, possible causes for excess fluoridation. Obviously, if your design is skewed, then the fluoride level will be higher. Apart from that, most people usually associate fluoride with the practice of intentional addition to public water supply to prevent tooth decay. But apart from the aspect of intentional water fluoridation in public water supply schemes, the fluoride can naturally also enter public water systems from sources such as runoffs, from the weathering of fluoride containing rocks, and probably also from leaching from the soil into groundwater. Now, apart from these natural sources, industrial emissions can also contribute with respect to fluoride entering drinking water. Let me give you an example of how industries contribute to addition of fluoride in drinking water levels. Now, let us say we are talking about an aluminium processing plant wherein bauxite is used to extract aluminium. In this industry, the operating temperature is so high that the bauxite is actually melted, that is Na2Al2F6, and at this operating temperature fluoride escapes as a gas, and then this fugitive fluoride can easily dissolve or get deposited into a nearby ecosystem, which can be a river or lake or also most probably a terrestrial ecosystem such as soil, and then further with any precipitation it can again reach any water body or a groundwater system in itself. In the Indian scenario, the first case of fluoride problem in drinking water with respect to higher levels of fluoride or fluorosis was reported in 1930 from the state of Andhra Pradesh, the then Andhra Pradesh. In 1937, the first report was published with respect to the issues of fluorosis. Now, to date, about 19 states and union territories and 196 districts are endemic to fluoride problem, such as Birham, Purulia, Dakshin, Dinjapur. These are specific to West Bengal. Okay, more than 66 million, that is greater than 6.6 crores of population is affected by fluorides. In the year 2008, the Indian government had set up the National Program for Prevention and Control of Fluorosis, and this step was taken due to the high prevalence of fluorosis, that is skeletal, non-skeletal and dental fluorosis across India. Now let us move on to the next slide, that is slide 16. Here on, we shall be discussing the problems of fluorosis step by step, that is dental fluorosis, skeletal fluorosis and non-skeletal fluorosis. So as you can see in slide 16, it is with respect to dental fluorosis. Medically speaking, dental fluorosis is the hypoplasia of the dental enamel resulting from the prolonged ingestion of drinking water which contains high levels of fluoride, and this manifested by the condition called as mottled enamel. As you can see, there are various stages of dental fluorosis: mild, moderately severe, extremely severe, and fluorosis is always associated with brown stains. Dental fluorosis is the most obvious sign of chronic overexposure to fluoride, as it is the only clear visible external mark of the toxin effects on the human body, that is the brown stains caused by stannous sulfide. McKay was actually notified in 1931. He was informed that the high levels of water fluoride was actually causing discoloration of tooth enamel. In fact, many parts of United States then started soon developing a striking correlation between mottled enamel and the fluoride content of public water supply, which was ranging from 2 to 13 ppm. Dental fluorosis basically occurs in the primary and permanent dentition. That is, once the teeth have erupted, fluorosis cannot develop, which means basically dental fluorosis is associated with children. Now, the clinical appearances of dental fluorosis can range from fine lacy markings to white specks to severe pitting with heavily stained and friable enamel. Okay. Now, as I told you, brown stains, which is basically due to the formation of stannous sulfide or even brown oxide from the reaction of tin ion. The severity of fluorosis basically depends on the amount of excess fluoride which has been consumed over a period of time when the teeth was developing, and this is usually between the age of 6 months to 6 years. Yes, teeth with dental fluorosis are less susceptible to dental caries. Now, if we look at the images, as I said, mild fluorosis, moderately severe and extremely severe fluorosis. Let me now describe to you the symptoms. Mild fluorosis, in its usual mildest form, fluorosis appears as opaque white patches on the enamel, while the moderately severe fluorosis, the appearance is brown, discolored and mottled enamel. Extremely severe fluorosis, the symptoms are pitted enamel and discoloration. Let us now move on to slide 17 to understand skeletal fluorosis. Basically, there are 5 stages to skeletal fluorosis: preclinical 1, preclinical 2, stage 1, stage 2 and stage 3. In preclinical 1, there is biochemical abnormalities in blood and bone composition. Preclinical 2 deals with digestive difficulties and fatigue. Stage 1 deals with gastrointestinal disorders, pain and stiffness in bones and joints. Stage 2, the symptoms are calcification of ligaments, chronic pain and bony spurs. Stage 3 deals with deformities, hunchback, spinal immobility. So basically when you talk about skeletal fluorosis, we are dealing with bone widening. As you can see in the images, overall bone density gets increased. The diameter of ulna also gets increased owing to cortical thickening. Now, based on the research reports of scientists, they have found that the fluoride's effects on bone is because of the chemical which is stored there. The studies have shown that very high dose of fluoride can stimulate the proliferation of bone building osteoblast cells. Yes, as the image shows, fluoride also alters the crystalline structure of bone. This actually can increase the risk of fractures. Basically, exposure to very high fluoride over a prolonged period of time results in acute to chronic skeletal fluorosis. The early stages of skeletal fluorosis starts with pain in bones, joints, muscle weaknesses and so forth. But during the later stages of skeletal fluorosis, calcification of bones take place, osteoporosis in long bones. Okay. Finally, crippling skeletal fluorosis may occur in people who have ingested 10 to 20 ppm of fluoride per day for more than 10 to 20 years. Let us now move on to slide 18 to understand the non-skeletal fluorosis issues. Basically, there are three kinds of problems that arises with respect to non-skeletal fluorosis. Firstly, gastrointestinal problems. The symptoms include consistent abdominal pain, intermittent diarrhea, constipation, and blood in stool. Secondly, neurological manifestations. The symptoms for this are nervousness, depression, tingling sensation in the finger and teeth. Finally, muscular manifestations. The symptoms for this is muscle weakness and stiffness, pain in the muscle, and loss of muscle power. So far, we have understood about water fluoridation, the systems for the same, the benefits of water fluoridation, the criteria for water fluoridation, the concern with excess fluoridation. So, now let us proceed to understand the significance and systems for defluoridation. Let us now move on to slide 19. Defluoridation is basically that process of water treatment wherein the excess fluoride is removed so that it is safe for human consumption. Basically, defluoridation is used to characterize methods that reduce the fluoride ion specifically without major other changes to the quality of treated water. That is, certain water treatments which have the potential or capacity to reduce the fluoride concentration along with other anions, cations, they are not considered as defluoridation methods. That means the general demineralizing techniques such as distillation, reverse osmosis, electrodialysis, which are able to remove fluoride partially or fully, are not considered as defluoridation methods. What I am trying to express is techniques which only remove fluoride without any addition or reduction of other parameters, only they are considered as fluoridation methods. Now, the defluoridation devices which needs to be employed should meet a certain criteria or requirements such as low maintenance cost, simple design, modest investment, efficiency to reduce fluoride content from 5 to 0.5 ppm. Now basically when we speak about these criteria, we need to understand that fluoride problem, that is excess fluoride problem, is basically affecting the villagers, those people who are unable to afford the treatment. Hence cost, simplicity is a major concern and criteria when any defluoridation technique is spoken about. Continuing, methods which only remove fluoride without any addition or reduction of any other biological or chemical or physical characteristics are yet to be discovered, and that is why the expression fluoride removal lacks precision. The various synthetic chemicals, that is anion and cation exchange resins, which have been employed or utilized for fluoride removal include activated carbon, calcium phosphate, bone charcoal, synthetic tricalcium phosphate. Now, more or less these are commercially produced resins which are expensive and not economical in most circumstances. In this context of application of defluoridation agents, we are basically referring to ion exchange technique and adsorption technique. But both of these techniques have two major drawbacks. First is the necessary flow through system is often very difficult to arrange when you don't have a piped water supply. Secondly, the gradual rate of exhaustion of the active agent cannot be easily detected. Moving on, the other method is your precipitation technique. Now in precipitation technique, the principle is addition of chemicals such as coagulants and coagulant aids, wherein the subsequent precipitation will also assist in removal of fluoride. In the other methods such as lime soda process of water softening, fluorides are also removed, but along with the removal of magnesium. Now, materials such as calcium phosphate and bone charcoal, as I've mentioned before, can be added for removal of excess fluoride content in water. And for doing so, the water must be allowed to pass through the filter bed, which contains fluoride retaining materials. Let us now move on to slide 20 to understand defluoridation by activated alumina. Basically, alumina is activated to become adsorptive, and the method of activation is usually through dehydration of aluminum hydroxides at a very high temperature of 300 to 600 degrees centigrade. Now, activated alumina, when compared to other defluoridizing agents, has the advantage of having a very high selectivity of fluoride. However, the necessity is you need to frequently activate alumina, which makes the technique expensive. Now, the other disadvantages of activated alumina are the adsorption of fluoride is only possible at a specific pH range, which means you need to do pre and post pH adjustment of the water before you can employ activated alumina. In this context, I would like to add on that the application of domestic defluoridation plant, which was launched by UNICEF in rural India, was actually based on activated alumina. Now, let us move on to the next slide to understand defluoridation by bone char. Slide 21. Bone char is basically the oldest known technology for water defluoridation, and this has been successfully employed since the 1940s. Basically, bone char is produced with animal bones which have passed through calcination process. Yes, raw bones have certain defluoridation value, and it is small and also limited by various organics which obstruct the interfaces where chemical reaction with fluoride takes place. Now, the process of defluoridation by bone char is dependent on temperature and pH of the raw water. Now, defluoridation by bone char is a highly economic technique wherein the percentage removal of fluoride is about 60 to 66%. However, it also has certain disadvantages such as the bone char can harbor bacteria and therefore it is unhygienic. Now, it is also a technique sensitive procedure, and most importantly in a country like India, application of bone char, that is something produced from the animal bones, can invite objections and resistance from the religion and culture point of view. Let us now move on to slide 22 to understand defluoridation by reverse osmosis. So as you are all aware, in reverse osmosis, the hydraulic pressure is exerted on one side of the semi-permeable membrane, which will force the water across the membrane, leaving the fluoride behind. Now, so far we have discussed most of the defluoridation techniques, but now let us move on to slide 23 to understand the most significant and important defluoridation technique, also popularly termed as Nalgonda technique. Slide 23. Nalgonda technique is basically named after a village in India where the method was pioneered. NEERI, that is National Environmental Engineering Research Institute, which is based in Nagpur, had evolved this economical and simple technique for removal of fluoride. In this technique, there is addition in sequence of sodium aluminate, that is filter alum, lime and bleaching powder to the fluoride water, and this is followed by flocculation, sedimentation and filtration. A very simple technique. This is very useful for both domestic and community water supply. The cost of investment is also less, the cost of maintenance is also less, and the other advantages it offers is there is simultaneous removal of color, odor, turbidity, bacteria and other organic contaminants. Now, this can be used to treat water in huge quantities, that is with respect to a community usage. Now, usually defluoridated water always provides a treated water of uniform quality, but there are certain drawbacks which also needs to be understood. For instance, desalinization has to be given, wherein the raw water contains total dissolved solids more than 1500 ppm, and obviously you're talking about alum, filter alum, hence the generation of sludge is very huge when compared to electrochemical defluoridation. Let us now move to the next slide, slide 24. As you can see here, basically Nalgonda technique is a combination of several unit operations and processes which involves rapid mixing, chemical interaction, flocculation, sedimentation, filtration, disinfection and sludge concentration, that is to recover the water and aluminium salt. Let us now move on to slide 25 to have a detailed understanding of this technique. So basically in rapid mix, the coagulant is rapidly and uniformly disposed through a single or a multiple phase system. Here the rapid mixing happens for a period of 30 to 60 seconds with a speed of 10 to 20 rpm, so that the coagulant which you have added is rapidly and uniformly dispersed. This actually helps in the formation of very good microflocs with the proper utilization of chemical coagulant. The second stage is your flocculation, wherein there is assistance which is offered to formation of suitable particles, that is flocks, from the destabilized colloidal size particles. Now, flocculation is generally achieved by gentle and prolonged mixing for a period of 10 to 15 minutes, and the flocculation happens at a speed of 2 to 4 rpm. The next step is sedimentation. that is wherein you separate with the aid of gravitational force suspended particles from the settleable particles. Then we move on to filtration, that is to remove the suspended solids from the colloidal impurities by passing the water through a porous media. Now, in the case of Nalgonda technique, the flocculated water is allowed to settle and filter through Fuller's earth candle overnight. Now, the treated water is available for drinking and cooking with desired level of fluoride. However, it is also important to understand that you still need to provide disinfection before using the water. So, if I need to recap the advantages of this process, firstly, there is no question of regeneration of media. It is not required. Secondly, you are not handling any acids or alkalis. Now, the chemicals what is being employed here are readily available, and actually they are being used in conventional municipal water supply scheme. Now, Nalgonda technique is economical, applicable to domestic use, very simple in terms of design, construction, operation and maintenance. Let us now move on to slide 26 to understand the various challenges which is encountered in defluoridation. Definitely the initial investment, and when it comes to media regeneration, the expense related to it. Then all techniques do not have very high fluoride removal efficiency, the difficulty to maintain the system, and especially if you are removing fluoride from the water and eventually end up with toxic sludge. These are few of the challenges which are faced in defluoridation. Let us now move on to the summary, slide 27. So, till now we have understood the evolution of water fluoridation, we have understood about fluoridation supplementation, we have understood the issues with respect to dental caries, dental fluorosis, skeletal fluorosis. You have also learned the drinking water quality standards for fluorides. In this presentation, you have also understood the various techniques by which water can be fluoridated and the techniques by which water can be defluoridated. Above all, you have also understood the construction, the working, the principle and the advantages that Nalgonda technique offers when it comes to defluoridation, which is by now the most popular low-cost economical method in public health engineering. Let us now move on to slide 28. I have listed few references for your kind perusal. Slide 29. In the next class, we shall be discussing about distribution systems. I thank you one and all for your kind hearing and patience. This is Dr. Rajesh Gopinath signing off. Godspeed.